Hello, this is Jeff Stachler. I'm the Extension Agent for Griggs County, North Dakota, and I started in September. I was the County Agent in Auglaize County, Ohio, which is in west central Ohio, and today I want to talk to you about Waterhemp and my experiences in west central Ohio. It is extremely important to properly identify Waterhemp and do that as early as possible. The number one way to separate Waterhemp from the other pigweeds is to realize that there is no hair on the stem and the petiole. That's the structure that attaches the leaf blade to the stem, which is exactly the same as Palmer Amaranth, where that has no hair as well. You focus in on the leaves to make sure you separate Waterhemp from the other pigweeds and look at the longer, narrower leaf, which we call lanceolate, for the Waterhemp. The Redroot pigweed and the Pal Amaranth that we also have hair on the stems, so that's how we separate. Here we're showing the stark contrast between Waterhemp having no hair and Redroot pigweed having lots of hair on the stem. I believe you can consistently, properly identify Waterhemp in a seedling stage. What you look for first is the cotyledons. Notice the cotyledons are smaller and more egg-shaped compared to the Redroot pigweed in these pictures, and that the Waterhemp has a longer, narrower leaf even early on. Waterhemp is dioecious, meaning it has male and female plants, which is different from Redroot pigweed and Pal Amaranth, where it is monoecious, so every plant has seeds on for those species. Waterhemp and Palmer Amaranth do not have seeds on every plant. They're just on the female plants because they're both dioecious. You can see that the white structures in the picture on the left is the stigma sticking out from the flowers that are compacted together in a female plant, whereas the male plant has much larger, more spread out flowers than the female does. While I was in Ohio, I would conduct a survey of weed control in soybean fields at the end of the season. I did this so that I knew how to focus my programming on weed management. And when I got to North Dakota here, I noticed there was some Waterhemp in soybean fields, so I wanted to know what density and situation we had with Waterhemp in Griggs County. So I went ahead and done a survey. I didn't travel quite as many miles as I did back in Ohio, but I was able to travel 5 parts of the townships in Griggs County, which was kind of the central part of the county. I rated weed density on weed free, meaning there was no plants in a field whatsoever. And after that, if there were plants present, that got a rating of a 1, 2, or a 3. If there were some scattered weeds, it was a 1. If there were some patches of weeds and more scattered weeds, it was a 2. If there were many patches and or lots of scattered weeds, then it was a 3. So here's the results from the 2020 Griggs County survey. In the left column we have the weed species. The middle column shows the percent of fields having that weed species present. And the density score is that scale of 1, 2, or 3 rating that I gave it. And you can see that if it's a whole plant, that was a 1. And you can see those differences within the species. I first want to point out the green row, which is the weed free. That meaning, again, no weeds present in a field. Only 21% of our fields in Griggs County were weed free. That's not where we want to be. That's not a good situation. However, you see the number 27 there. What that represents is that I also recorded those fields that had 3 broadleaf plants or fewer in a field. And so if we add 27 to 21, we end up with 48%. And that's not too bad of our fields that have 3 or fewer plants in them at harvest time. And so that's not so bad, but we got to make sure we're focusing and eliminating those plants so we really get to a weed-free situation. The number one weed in Griggs County in 2020 was at 35%, and that was kochia. We had common lamb's quarters and barnyard grass at 17%, and the weed of most concern to me, other than kochia, is waterhemp, and that was present in 13% of our fields. That's way too much already. I'll show you how that compares to some Ohio data. But we need to be very concerned, and we need to think about waterhemp just like we do palm or amaranth. We need to be afraid of it and do everything in our power to eliminate it if you don't have it yet. Joe Auglaize shared with me this slide. This shows the state of North Dakota and where waterhemp has been confirmed, and you can see everything in the eastern half of the county has waterhemp at this point in time. Here's a map of Ohio. The blue area is west central Ohio, where I'm from and where I worked. Auglaize County is where I worked, and this area is heavily ag with livestock also. Here we're looking at the percent of fields having waterhemp in those 4 counties since 2014. You can see the yellow row is Auglaize County where I worked. I started there in 2015. We already had 21% of the soybean fields having waterhemp at the end of the season, which is way too much, and was the most in the state of Ohio at that point in time. You can see that farmers continued to ignore proper management, and it continued to increase over the years, as high as 53% in 2019. In 2020, we did see a slight decrease in the amount of waterhemp in fields. However, that's not much, but it was due to later planting and the use of enlist soybeans. You can see Darke and Shelby counties are very similar to Auglaize in the increase over time, but they saw a bigger decline in the amount of waterhemp this past year. And Mercer County kind of holds in there and was at a high already in 2016. So not all parts of the county are going to be the same. In Auglaize County, Interstate 75 kind of separates the eastern and western sides of the county. And you can see from this slide that the western side has a greater density of waterhemp than the eastern side, especially in 2016. Both increased. The western side as high as 64% of the fields in 2018, but has declined in the last 2 years, whereas the eastern side continued to increase and did see a significant decline this past year. Here's a picture of waterhemp in Auglaize County in 2019, a total disaster. This field ended up getting harvested, which is too bad. It should have been mowed off. And Joe Auglaize wanted me to remind you that there are fields like this in the Red River Valley. One of the biggest concerns that we have about waterhemp is the opportunity for resistance to herbicides. This is the most resistance of any broadleaf species in the world. This slide shows the percent mortality of 5 different populations of waterhemp with 4 different herbicides. And we can't say that all of these are resistant, but certainly there's initial data here that shows that we might have some resistance to some of these herbicides. The herbicides that were used was ATR is atrazine at 1 pound active ingredient per acre for the 1x rate. Meso is mesotrione or Callisto at 3 fluid ounces at the 1x rate. 2,4-D at 1x rate was 1.5 pints per acre, which is a little less than what you can use as a full rate in the enlist system. And then the foamy is Fomisafen or Flexstar, and here they used a 1/4x and a 1x rate to compare these waterhemp populations. Each row is a different population. There's 5 of them there. The first one is from that picture I showed you, and you can see that mortality was less than 100% for all 3 herbicides, and the mesotrione was the lowest at 52%. If we look at the second row, this is surviving plants, I know for sure, from the treatment that I applied in a research study where we had Valor down at 2.5 ounces per acre, and we followed with Enlist 1 at 32 fluid ounces plus glyphosate. And you can see that there is less mortality, especially with the mesotrione and the fomesafen compared to the first field. Look at how the multiple years of poor control in the field that was bad in 2019 have even lower mortality rates for some of the herbicides, in particular the fomesafen and the 2,4-D. However, if we look at the eastern side where it hasn't been as frequent, and this is one of the things, is that early on we have more susceptibility to many different herbicides. But later on, if you don't get a handle on this, you're going to have that opportunity to select for resistance. And if you have it to begin with, it's coming in from somewhere else where it's likely resistant to glyphosate and ALS chemistry for sure. And it's just a matter of how much you use other herbicides. One of the things that this chart also shows is that with this type of potential resistance to all of these different herbicides, that means this type of resistance might be metabolic. And if you have metabolic resistance, you can have resistance to a herbicides that you've never even used before. And so that's very concerning, and we need to keep that in mind. It's not all doom and gloom. You can see that you can change things over time. This is the percentage of weed-free fields in the 4 counties from Ohio. You can see that Auglaize County had the lowest percentage of weed-free fields in 2018 at 5%. So this was very poor weed control in the county. But you can see by 2020, we've increased the number of fields that have weed-free in it, and is higher than at any point in time that I was there on the job. So we're making some management changes. The use of Enlist soybeans made a difference because some people made 2 applications during the season, and that was able to keep them under wraps. And you can see that Dark and Shelby counties is very similar and saw some good increases in weed-free fields in 2020. And Mercer County, again, just kind of hangs in there, much higher than the other 3 counties and pretty consistent, although it has increased in the last couple of years. So in summary, know how to identify water hemp. It's extremely important for proper identification so you're not getting it confused with Redroot, Pigweed, and Pal Amaranth. Again, no hair on the stems is what you're looking for water hemp. You need to treat water hemp like Palmer Amaranth. You really don't want it. Eliminate it any way possible. If you don't have it, don't get it started in your fields. Ignoring water hemp will only cause it to get worse and potentially cause resistance to herbicides. Water hemp is prone to resistance to herbicides, as I showed you earlier, and what we know from other states in the U.S. Water hemp has a long germination period. Joe mentioned that it was coming up in September yet this year. That's very disheartening and a major issue for managing water hemp easily. And so another reason why you don't want water hemp is that longer germination period. No herbicides will completely control water hemp in a single application. Again, no herbicides will completely control water hemp in a single application. And one of the things that I have seen and Joe mentioned to me is that there were fields of Extend soybeans, Enlist soybeans, Liberty Link soybeans, where water hemp was not completely controlled, especially when a pre-emergence herbicide was not used. And so the question begs, are they surviving because there's resistance, or are they surviving because of letting them get too large? We don't know that yet. Joe's collected some samples and he's going to look into that, but it doesn't bode well for resistance. Multiple applications of residual herbicides is the only thing that's going to solve this problem. So pre-emergence and a post-emergence residual. And remove those surviving plants by hand to stop weed seed production. That's very critical, especially when it's just getting started in the field. NDSU has a non-discrimination policy. Here it is. And I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to visiting with you on December the 3rd. Thank you and have a great day.